Great, thank you. Welcome, everyone. I'm Deb Nelson. I'm an assistant director here at the New York Metropolitan Transportation Council, and I'm joined by my counterpart, Gerry Bogacz, who's also an assistant director here at NIMTIC. And it's our pleasure and honor to host this year's annual meeting of the Metropolitan Area Planning, or MAP, Forum. This meeting will be focusing, as you'll see on the agenda, the meeting will be focusing on, first a federal update on the Federal Infrastructure Act, and we'll also be having presentations on some recently adopted regional transportation plans. NIMTIC will be presenting on its moving forward regional transportation plan, and the North Jersey Transportation Planning Authority will be presenting on their Plan 2050. So that'll be a very interesting to see where we are and where those plans focus. There will also be a public participation session, and Gerry will facilitate that, I believe. And then there will be some brief work program updates that I think you will find of interest. But we really appreciate everyone joining us here today. But for what I'd like to do is I'm going to hand it over to Gerry Bogacz, who is going to do the roll call of this annual meeting for the MAP 4 members, and he will also introduce our keynote speaker. So thank you. Sit back and enjoy.
Thank you, Deb. Since I think the easiest way to do the roll call will be, I have a number of people noted representing different organizations. I will call them out. I'm probably going to miss some people because there are multiple people for several of the MAP Forum members, but at least everyone who is represented will be on this list. So Connecticut Metropolitan Council of Governments, we have Matt Fulda on. Capital Region Council of Governments, we have Kara Radzins. Lehigh Valley Planning Commission, we have Paul Karafides, and Fidel, if you could unlock Paul, that would be good. For the Naugatuck Valley Council of Governments, we have Rick Dunn, Mark Nielsen, and Rich Donovan. For NIMTIC, we have myself and Deb and others. North Jersey Transportation Planning Authority, we have Mary Amin and Dave Barrand, as well as several others. Orange County Transportation Council, we have Alan Sorensen, and the Western Connecticut Council of Governments, we have Kristen Hagestilianos. So if anybody's missed in that, we apologize, but we think we have all the organizations who are on the call noted. Having done that, let's move into our presentation. I'm pleased to introduce Erich Zimmerman as our keynote speaker today. Erich is the Deputy Director and Transportation Director for the National Association of Regional Councils, or NARC. NARC is an association of metropolitan planning organizations and regional councils throughout the country. Recently, over the last several weeks, Erich has been plowing through the voluminous and complex Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, and he'll be talking with us today about this watershed level of federal investment in infrastructure that the Act provides. He'll be doing that generally and also focusing on the transportation infrastructure in particular. After Erich's presentation, we will be entertaining any questions from the MAP Forum members who are unlocked, and time permitting from the audience. But I want to underscore that the audience will remain muted and can submit any questions via the webinar chat pod. And then Jessica Ortiz, again, time permitting, will be able to read those questions in the aftermath of Erich's presentation. So having said all that, Erich, thank you so much for being with us this morning. I think you want to take the screen and show your PowerPoint, so please proceed to do that. And hopefully you are unmuted.
I think I am, hopefully.
Very good.
Thanks, Gerry. Appreciate that introduction. I'm not seeing my own slides on the screen. Hold on just a moment while are you seeing my slides?
No, we're seeing you, but not your slides.
There is an option under your screen that says share the screen.
Yeah,
and then
that's
you're gonna...
what I thought I did. Let's see, let's try again.
Here we go.
There, you see it now? Okay, great.
It's coming. Yep. You're good.
Great. Thank you very much, Gerry. Appreciate the introduction. Very pleased to be with you all this morning. Lot to get into, so I'm going to go ahead and dive right in. I will note that there is a full analysis of the bill if folks are interested at our website. Still on the front page, you can see there's a link to a post there that has a full analysis of the legislation. I'm going to give as detailed an overview as I can in the time permitted today, and I'm sure there will be other questions. Folks are certainly happy to get in touch with me, and I'm happy to discuss further if anything's still left open. So we are talking about the IIJA, the worst acronym in Washington. The administration seems to like to favor calling it the bipartisan infrastructure law now, or the bill. So that's you can make your choice as to what you want to call it. $1.2 trillion in total spending, $550 billion in new spending in this bill. Includes Senate transportation reauthorization, water infrastructure, has funding for a number of other areas I'll touch on briefly. As I'm sure folks are aware, this was a package fully negotiated within the Senate, passed the Senate with 69 votes in a heavily bipartisan vote, and was technically bipartisan in the House, 228 to 206, and obviously has been signed into law. So at this point, we're talking about implementation, but I'm going to give you a little bit of a sense of what's in the bill and some of the specifics, especially as it relates to MPOs and regional planning. So here's a bit of a breakdown that the White House put out of the $550 billion in new spending. I'll point out some things. Obviously, a very extensive investment in rail, the largest investment in rail that we've ever seen. I'll also note that, as it notes here, there's $66 billion in new funding for rail. The bill also authorizes another $36 billion or so for rail programs that need to be appropriated in the future. So there's $100 billion in new investments in rail if all that comes to pass. Public transit, again, $39 billion in new funding, but there's also existing levels of funding that are also included as part of the reauthorization. So the investment in public transit is actually much larger than $39 billion, not quite double that 39, but it's many tens of billions of dollars more than that. So we're talking enormous investments, some of the largest investments in certain areas that we've seen. And that's just in transportation. Obviously, there's funding in some other areas as well. The sort of energy, environment, and climate bucket includes $55 billion for water infrastructure, $50 billion generally for resilience, $65 billion for power infrastructure, and then broadband is its own sort of third bucket, which gets itself $65 billion in new investment just through this legislation. So these are just enormous figures that the likes of which we've certainly not seen in quite some time, if ever. In some of these areas, of course, these are by far the largest dollar amounts we've seen committed. So I'm going to spend the majority of my time talking about what's here for transportation. So the bill, as I mentioned, $550 billion in new funding, about 275, almost exactly half of that is provided for specifically for transportation. About $90 billion of that is in contract authority. That's committed to the transportation authorization portion of the bill. And then there's about $184 billion in what they call guaranteed appropriations. So these are basically advanced appropriations. It's money that is in the bill. Once the bill passed, those funds are available. They don't require any additional action by Congress. And that is how a lot of the funding in this bill actually flowed, which is an important part of sort of how the bill is structured. So here's a little bit about what's in the bill, especially on the highway side of the program, for some of the programs that I know are sort of most important for local communities and for MPOs and regions. Obviously, SDVGP is perhaps the most important. That's $72 billion. You can see a substantial increase in funding for that. Also for HSIP, the safety program, sees a 34% increase. There's a couple of new formula programs, Carbon Reduction and Protect, the Resilience Program. I'm going to get into a little bit of the details on those. Smaller increases for CMAQ and National Freight Program. A very substantial increase for the SDVGP set-aside, also known as Transportation Alternatives, which sees a 71% increase in funding. And then also a decent increase for metropolitan planning as well. So as mentioned, a lot of the funding in this bill, because it was done with these advanced appropriations, are done actually through discretionary grants. And I'll talk in a little bit more detail about some of those. Of course, formula funding, the way that works is the states receive a chunk of funding each state receives a portion of a program's funding, and then that funding is distributed. Some of it stays with the state, some of it goes down to the local level, but everybody kind of shares in that funding. The discretionary grants, of course, the way that works is you eligible entities apply for those funds, and the decisions about what gets funded is made at USDOT. So a very different approach to how funding is distributed. So there are 2 new significant formula programs, several additional formula programs outside of reauthorization as well on bridges, EV charging, transit state of good repair. And then, as I mentioned, dozens, literally dozens of new discretionary programs, plus many new pilot programs, which sort of operate similar to discretionary grant programs as well. So in total, I count about 42 sections within the bill that impact in some way MPOs and RTPOs and regional councils. There are 2 new formula programs, 11 new competitive grant programs within transportation alone, and then 6 new competitive pilot programs. And these are just the ones that apply to MPOs, RTPOs, regional councils. There's also many others that apply, for example, only to states or to other entities other than regional or metropolitan planning entities. So you can see the total amount. This is just in the new spending, and this is just competitive grant programs within USDOT. Totals over $100 billion in funding that will be distributed by USDOT over the coming 5 to 10 years of this program. So it's a very significant amount of funding that's going to go out in competitive grant programs. So this is an extremely important component of this legislation. But before I get into some of those, I'm going to breeze through a few of the policy changes that the bill does contain. Of course, along with new programs, there's also changes to existing programs, and I'll touch on those very quickly. Within the Surface Transportation Block Grant Program, of course, that program is suballocated to the local level. We had hoped to increase the percentage of that program suballocated, but it did stay at 55%, which is where it ended up at the end of the FAST Act. Importantly, the program also modifies the population bands within the program, and that is to say that areas from 50 to 200,000 will now receive a proportional share of the funds that come through the state to the local level for surface transportation block grant funding. So this is a really important change. Will help ensure that there is a little bit more say among some of the smaller MPOs for how funds are spent within their state and obviously within their metropolitan area. Under TAP, as I mentioned, extremely substantial increase in spending or in funding rather for that program. TAP is now pegged at as 10%. Whatever STB GP receives, TAP is now 10% of that amount. And so that means it's going to receive $7.3 billion over the course of this bill. In addition, this program is also suballocated. It was previously suballocated at 50%. Now 59% of the funds that come through TAP will flow down and be spent at the local level. In addition, provisions that allow a state to allocate 100% of its funding if it wishes to, all of it down to the local level, which is an interesting change. In addition, makes a modification to allow smaller urbanized areas, which for unknown reasons were left out as being eligible. So areas of 50 to 200,000 are now eligible under TAP. Under metropolitan planning, I think perhaps one of the most important changes, or the most important change, was some provisions to allow for consideration of housing within the metropolitan planning context. There's some requirements if you're if you're a TMA over 200,000, and there's some allowances for other MPOs. But basically, it starts to make housing a part of the consideration when doing transportation planning. There's also a few other what I think are sort of more technical corrections to planning, but that housing one I think is the biggest one. Under CMAQ, add some new eligibilities. I think perhaps the biggest change here is allowing CMAQ funds to be used for operating assistance for public transportation. And there is no time limit on that in rural areas and in urbanized areas under 200,000 in population. So that's a big change under CMAQ. And then another provision, this is a new provision, not a modification of existing law, but essentially it's under increasing safe and accessible transportation options. This provision requires that MPOs and states use at least 2.5% of their planning funds to carry out one or more activities that would basically fall under the guise of complete streets. So development of complete street standards, development of a plan, development of another type of active transportation plan, regional planning to consider alternatives to highway capacity, new highway capacity, and then transit-oriented development as well would all fall under that. So I think this is going to be probably, it depends on how much of these activities you're doing now. I'm sure many areas are already spending more than 2.5% of their planning funds on activities that fall under this, and that'll have no impact. If you're not, then it will be required that you increase your spending so that it represents 2.5% of what you receive in PL funds each year. All right, so now let's talk about a few of the funding programs that are in the bill. First, I'll touch on the first new formula program. This is extremely important for local areas and for MPOs. This is the carbon reduction program. It's a new formula program broadly defined as one to reduce transportation emissions. There is suballocation as well within this program. So 65% of the funds that come for this flow to this program for each state have to then flow down to local areas, just as they do under STBGP. There's a pretty broad range of eligibility under this program. Projects such as public transportation, bike ped, ITS, congestion pricing. It's a pretty broad program with quite a bit of flexibility. In addition, each state, along with the MPOs within its state, has 2 years to develop a carbon reduction strategy. And the funding for this program is $6.4 billion over the 5 years of the reauthorization portion of the bill. The second formula program is the PROTECT program, which is a resilience program. This is an interesting program. It contains both formula funds that will flow, a portion of which will flow to each state, and then also has a competitive grant portion as well. So under the formula program, 2% of those funds are set aside for planning specifically. And then there's $1.4 billion for the competitive grants. There's actually 4 competitive grants created under this program on the competitive side of this program. Those include resilience planning and resilience improvement, so both the planning and the implementation of resilience projects. There's community resilience and evacuation route grants, and then an at-risk coastal infrastructure grants program. I think this is interesting in the way that it's structured. Though the federal share is 80%, as most funding of this type is, you can actually increase the percentage of a project that can be funded with federal funding first by if a state or MPO has a resilience improvement plan and the project that is being funded is prioritized within that plan, you can increase the federal share by 7%, and then you can increase it another 3% up to 90% if an MPO has incorporated its resilience plan into its metropolitan transportation plan. So they're not requiring the development of such a plan necessarily. They are inducing the creation of such a plan and then encouraging its inclusion in the metropolitan transportation plan. So sort of a novel approach to that issue. So then we now we get into the competitive grant programs. I'm not going to be able to spend a lot of time on any one of these. I will go into a little bit of detail about one of them just to demonstrate a little bit of what Congress did, but you can see there's a very long list of new competitive grant programs. As mentioned, this is the list primarily where MPOs, RTPOs, and other regional entities are eligible to apply. I didn't list everything here. But you can see everything from a very significant bridge discretionary program, grants for charging and fueling infrastructure. There's some safety programs in here, including a railroad crossing elimination program, some healthy streets program, and an active transportation program. So it's a pretty broad range of programming that will be coming out of USDOT. In a pretty broad range of areas that folks will be interested in, I'm sure. There's also additionally a congestion relief program. This is another new competitive program to basically advance innovations in reducing congestion. Some of these eligibilities include congestion management, HOV toll lanes, cordon pricing, congestion pricing, which I know is interesting in the area which some of you represent, carpooling, things like that. This is for MPOs over 1 million in population, and for areas under 1 million, it's up to the state to obligate funds in those areas. This is not an enormous program, $250 million over 5 years, but it does get into some areas that are certainly of interest in many places. So a little bit of detail, and the reason I'm showing some detail on at least one program is to sort of highlight the idea that for those of you that are going to be interested in applying for funds, you can actually go to the legislation or to an analysis. I include some of this detail in the analysis that I created. I'm sure others have done the same. And you can get a strong sense for the types of programs, or the types of projects that are going to be eligible under some of these programs. And Congress goes into a decent level of detail to outline at least what their expectations are for how DOT will roll these funds out. So you can start to get a sense in advance for the types of projects that you might be considering, putting forward once funding for these become available through DOT. So this is the Safe Streets and Roads for All program. This is essentially a Vision Zero program that provides $1 billion over 5 years. It does require a comprehensive safety action plan, and significant funding goes toward production of that plan. You can see it lays out some of the elements that are required under the plan. MPOs are eligible under this program at 80% federal share. And so this is where you start to get into some of the details of the program itself, because funding is provided for doing the plan, but also for planning elements and for actually carrying out projects. And you can see they go through a very detailed list on sort of some of the criteria upon which projects are going to be judged once you've applied for them. So, for example, engagement with public and private stakeholders, employing low-cost, high-impact strategies to improve safety over a wide geographical area. So these are the types of things that they're going to be looking for in judging projects on. I'm not going to go through each one of those. You can sort of get the idea of what I'm talking about, but this detail exists in the legislation that was passed. So that's the reason I'm highlighting that. It's this times the dozen or so programs that are in the bill, but you can start to get a sense of the types of projects you might consider putting forward for some of these. In addition, as I mentioned, there's a number of pilot programs. The first one is not one that MPOs are per se eligible for, but I think is an important one, which is testing out the concept of a per mile user fee to replace the gas tax. Some of these are very closely tied to MPOs. The prioritization process pilot program, essentially providing funds to do project scoring and then integrating that scoring into your project decision process. Reconnecting communities. This is taking down of obsolete transportation facilities that are dividing communities or having other negative impacts. There's funding both for planning and for capital construction as well. Transportation Access Pilot Program. This is the pushing or working toward developing a workable accessibility data set with the long-term view likely of having some kind of transportation access measure or something in the future. And not sure how much this plays in your regions. I'm sure in some it does. Wildland Crossing Safety is another pilot program under the bill to reduce wildlife vehicle collisions. So you can see this runs a very wide gamut of issues and opportunities for areas to get funding for some of these different programs. So very quickly, I can never leave a presentation like this without talking about the Highway Trust Fund. You would think with all this new spending that maybe they found a magic solution to funding our transportation system. In fact, they did not, as I'm sure is not a surprise to most of you. What they did is what they've been doing now for the last 15 or so years, which is transferring funds from the general fund into the Highway Trust Fund. This time it took a $118 billion transfer in order to get the reauthorization bill through. And that means since 2008, they've transferred about $270 billion to keep the trust fund solvent, which is a heck of a lot of cheese. And this bill really does nothing to solve that. In fact, in many ways, makes the cliff that much bigger next time around. It wouldn't be shocking if it took us 180 billion or 200 billion dollars next time, and if we go with the straight transfer as the funding funding levels have increased, it takes that much more in the future. Plus, this bill sort of builds in its own demise with things like encouraging electric vehicle uptake, which of course means less gas tax receipts. So we've got sort of the double whammy there in terms of what it's going to take in the future. Now, as I mentioned, this bill does does have this mileage-based user fee study, so perhaps that is our future solution. But at least at the moment, this bill basically just makes the cliff for the trust fund that much higher. So what's coming next? Well, obviously, USDOT has a daunting amount of work ahead of it as it tries to take some input from stakeholders, including yourselves, as to how they should roll this out. They're going to be doing an unbelievable amount of rulemaking, writing of programs, and eventually we'll start to see NOFAs, and the distribution of funds will begin. There is certainly some instruction to implement fairly quickly. We're starting to hear that they're talking about perhaps the first programs rolling out as early as the end of January, which would be very fast. So one of the things that you're encouraged to do is to think ahead and to plan early, identifying folks within your team that might be working on this, considering whether some kind of grant writer or other person is on your team that could help, or whether you would want that, asking for help from your associations, from USDOT and others there. And then you're encouraged to notify your member of Congress whenever you're pursuing funds through this program. Obviously, there was some hope of some earmarks in this bill or in the reconciliation bill. Neither of those are going to happen. So members of Congress will have a great interest in helping to indicate that they helped secure funds for their districts, obviously. And then finally, my organization, NARC, along with AMPO, are developing a joint process to provide specific feedback to the administration on this. If you have not seen the information about that, it's gone out from both organizations in the past few days. Please reach out if you're interested in doing this. Reach out to me and let me know. I'm happy to include you in that process. But we're going to be doing some working groups to take a deep dive into some of the areas within the bill and provide feedback to the administration how these could be implemented in a way that's most beneficial for regions, for communities, and we hope to give them some good feedback in that regard. So that was a lot of words in a fairly short amount of time. So thank you very much for your time, and I'm certainly happy to answer questions.
Erich, thank you for going through that entire thing in 20 minutes, which is pretty amazing. And I do want to point out that you're one of the few people on the planet who's actually read the entire bill. So, and
yes.
And you can
and
still speak,
it.
and you can still speak. So that's good.
That's right.
We do have 3 questions that came through the chat pod, but I wanted to ask if of the people who are unlocked on the map forum participants list, if you have any questions verbally, anyone, before we get into what's on the chat pod.
Yeah, Gerry, this is Mark Nielsen and VCOG. Quick question, Erich. I guess my one thing I haven't been able to figure out is, when is the federal dollars going to be available? I mean, there's a lot of this money was already appropriated. There's guaranteed appropriations, but so when is the new money likely to be flowing to the states? Again, your comment about identify things early and get moving on it. I just worry that in Connecticut they may be kind of sort of waiting to see what kind of appropriations will be allocated to the state. Do you have an idea when the money is going to be available?
Yeah, so the guaranteed appropriations are essentially available immediately. I don't know the exact time frame, but some of those funds will be available to flow very, very soon, because the bill breaks them up by fiscal year, but
Right.
essentially this fiscal year's allocation has already been determined and should be available very soon for distribution.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, was there another continuing resolution to extend FAST Act for like another month or through a certain time period? Or
Yeah, so the CR complicates things, especially on the reauthorization side, anything with contract authority, because these continuing resolutions, the current one is now slated to go into February, so for the next 11 weeks, that locks us in at the FAST Act obligation limitation, and so basically it locks us in at the FAST Act funding level. So, this would become a real problem if we go through the entire year under a CR. At the point at which they finally do pass some spending bills, we should see that increase in the available funding, the available contract authority. But that the CRs are definitely a complicating factor, especially for your programs like STBGP, HSIP, any of the apportioned programs like that. So, so on the many of the competitive grant programs, that funding will be available for distribution more quickly. We're going to have to wait and see. And of course, you'll get some STBGP funding because you were getting it, what you were getting previously. The increase might not come right away. It might be a little time before we see that happen.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mark. Any other questions from the map forum reps?
Gerry, it's Rick. Sorry, another NBCOG question. Hey, Izzy, good to see you. How are you?
Hey, Rick.
Hey, I had one question. I know it's not top of agenda for everyone, but Healthy Streets and Vision Zero, both competitive programs, discretionary programs. Is there anything in the bill that requires state DOTs or MPOs to adopt any of these principles?
So there are some requirements around some plans to take a look at safety issues, especially the vulnerable road user safety assessment is one that jumps to mind. And I have to go back and confirm whether that's a requirement or encouraged. I believe it is a requirement. One of our concerns is that there doesn't seem to be language requiring that states also reach out to their MPOs on that. So that's one area that we're going to get some clarification on. But that's one area where it does seem like there is some heavier focus on the safety side of things, at least.
But nothing on the Healthy Streets Resilience.
I don't believe that there are requirements, but I'll go back and verify that, and I can reach back out. But I don't think there's specific requirements, again, because they are competitive grants. It's up to individual entities to apply for them.
Thank you very much.
All right, thanks, Rick. So in the interest of time, Jessica, could you take the first two questions that came in through the chat pod?
Sure. So our first question is just a clarifying question. What does rail include? Does it include commuter rail, Amtrak, freight rail?
It primarily includes Amtrak and some commuter rail. I believe there might be freight rail in there too. I'm sorry, I'm not positive about that. But certainly Amtrak gets an enormous investment through this, larger than probably they've gotten combined over the last since its existence. But I believe it does include freight rail as well. So I believe it's pretty all inclusive. And at the very least, there are some other programs that have significant levels of funding as well that are multimodal in nature, and that certainly get at some freight rail components as well. So.
Great, thank you. I know that you mentioned the railroad crossing elimination program. Is there a program that specifically deals with legacy issues such as train horns or instead of a speaker at railroad crossings?
I don't believe that is in the legislation. No, I think the primary issue they dealt with there was the railroad crossing eliminations.
Okay, and
thank you.
Thanks, Jessica. With that, we're going to have to call time on this. We are recording the other questions that are in the chat pod and can follow up on some of them and share them with Erich offline. Erich, thank you so much for all that information.
Absolutely.
And, it's a complicated thing for all of us to go through, and your work doing that for us has been very helpful. So thank you for being with us this morning.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Sure. And I'm going to turn the meeting back over to my colleague, Deb.
Well, thank you. So the next part of our meeting will be to get some presentations, an update from both the New York Metropolitan Transportation Council and the North Jersey Transportation Planning Authority, NJTPA, Jan Kahn from NIMTIC, he's our regional planning manager. He will present on NIMTIC's regional plan. And Lois Goldman who is the long-range planning director at NJTPA, will then present. And this is going to be very interesting because these plans were very recently adopted, and then now we have this new funding source. So it'll be very interesting to see how they align and what things might go forward. So I'm going to hand it over to Jan Kahn. Thank you.
Fidel, is Jan unlocked?
Yes, he is.
Jan, it's all yours. Jan, we're not hearing you. Still not, Jan. Still nothing, Jan. Maybe we can switch over to Lois first, and then see if we can fix Jan's problem.
Sure, just testing. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. And I'll share my screen. Do you want me to share my screen, or do you want to do the slides, Gerry?
No, you can share.
Okay. Let me do the slideshow from the beginning. All right. So my head is spinning, I have to say, from what Erich just said. But I will be touching on sort of how some of that will relate to us at the end of the presentation. So I had actually geared my presentation to be keying a little. Jan, are you there? Okay, I thought I heard Jan.
Lois, we don't have your screen if you're trying to share it. We don't see it.
I'm sorry. Could you, I don't know how you do that. Do you make me a presenter?
I think Yinka is going to do it.
Oh, share. I'm sorry. I had to share right there that I didn't hit. I think it was user error on my part. Let's try it now. Share.
Can you hear me now, by the way?
Oh, we can hear you, Jan. So should we go back to the original? Can you see my screen just for curiosity so I'm ready? So Jan, are you there? And would you like, Gerry, what do you want to do? Do you want me to go forward, or would you like to go back to having Jan go first?
Why don't you go forward, Lois?
Okay, happy to do it. Can you see my slides now?
Yes.
Okay, terrific. Great. So what I was going to say was I was going to kind of key a little bit off what Jan was saying, but I will tell you that our Plan 2050 in NJTPA region, Transportation People Opportunity, has many similarities to Moving Forward Connected, which is the NIMTIC plan. So I will be talking a little bit about that. And as Debra said, we both have planned the year 2050 as our horizon year, and we both adopted our plans in September. And we talked with NIMTIC staff as we created our plans about big metropolitan issues, planning issues such as Trans-Hudson River capacity, financial forecasting, and our respective looks on pandemic-related changes and recovery. And also our plans contain very similar elements. For example, for the first time, our plans include federally mandated performance measures to track the region's progress in addressing highway and transit needs and serious injuries and fatalities. Plan 2050 represents the NJTPA's 30-year vision for the region's transportation future. We use data and analysis, and were informed by extensive input from our trustees, agency partners, and the public. We held a virtual board retreat in the summer of 2020 to gauge the board's current and long-range transportation priorities, and invited thought leaders on issues such as climate change and resilience, federal policy, and technology to explore the board's priorities further. We called these TPA Tuesday Symposia. We also published 4 background papers to inform the plan, and I'll highlight these later. So in case you're not familiar with the NJTPA region, we are the 13 counties of northern and central New Jersey. Our board of trustees is comprised of commissioners from each of the 13 counties, the mayors of Newark and Jersey City, and representatives from New Jersey Transit, NJDOT, the Port Authority, the Governor's Office, and the Citizens Representative. Our chair is Commissioner Kathy DeFilippo from Morris County. One of the key challenges of doing a long-range plan that looks 30 years out is the unknown. So we start with looking at the past, present, and some well-grounded indicators of the future. Even before the pandemic, our region was changing in terms of demographics, redevelopment, emerging technologies, e-commerce, and other variables. And while Plan 2050 acknowledges it may take 5 to 10 years to recover from some pre-pandemic levels, we've seen other changes accelerate. These changes include a renewed focus on active transportation like biking and walking, the shared use of public spaces, and significantly increased freight and goods movement activity, and evolving dynamics regarding employment, commuting patterns, climate change, and housing. There's also a recognition of an urgent need to address long-standing racial and socioeconomic disparities in transportation. So as with the NIMTIC plan, both plans were required to do public outreach and to ground truth the data and analysis, what the data analysis was telling us, and to support the direction from our decision makers and thought leaders. And we needed to hear from a diversity of the public. So due to the pandemic, we conducted all of our outreach virtually. We also had a hotline that people could call into, and we distributed 20,000 bookmarks at public libraries with information about the plan to reach out to people who may not be connected online. As you can see, we had numerous public meetings, conducted a survey with almost 2,200 respondents, and used social media fairly extensively. We also had the TPA Tuesday Symposia I mentioned earlier. And we conducted a multimedia art contest for children ages 5 to 15 and held events to engage young adults and traditionally underrepresented populations, including low-income residents and people with disabilities and their caregivers. So what did we hear, you may ask? North Jersey residents want to be able to drive less and to have more travel options. Improving and expanding public transit was one of the most frequent comments we heard, followed by the need for safer and more convenient bicycling and walking options. And we heard that many people want to address historic inequity in the transportation system and want to steer policy and investments towards increasing access for all. So all of this taken together comes together into our priorities. In a similar way to moving forward, our priorities address all aspects of the transportation system of Northern New Jersey, the accessibility and mobility needs of people, and gives direction for facing the opportunity and challenges ahead. The top priority is the need for greater Trans-Hudson rail capacity and the need to construct the Hudson Tunnel and advance the Gateway program of improvements. We are glad to hear yesterday that the Hudson Tunnel has received all federal and environmental permits and may begin construction as soon as fiscal year 2023, should the $12 billion in funding be found. Other planned priorities are reducing crashes and ensuring the safety of all travelers. This is a primary focus across all policies, programs, and investments. Our region has too many pedestrian injuries and deaths above the national average. To maintain and improve the physical condition and reliability of all transportation modes. Most of the federal performance measures are aimed at measuring progress in state of good repair and reliability. To create and support opportunities for walking, biking, and other active transportation modes. These help make the transportation system cleaner and more efficient and support public health. And this was one of the Plan 2050 background papers. And to support efficient freight movement, the region has long been a goods movement hub. However, the pandemic has altered retail and business operations, requiring new approaches to key freight issues. Another Plan 2050 background paper looked at how freight operations might be impacted by the pandemic, and I believe that paper may have been discussed at this forum previously. And then to work collaboratively towards a more transportation system that fully addresses the needs of low-income and minority communities. And to look at opportunities on the horizon, North Jersey is particularly vulnerable to climate change impacts due to its dense population and extensive coastline and waterways. A Plan 2050 background paper explored measures the NJTPA will take to help address these needs. And regarding transportation technologies, such as adaptive transit signals, traffic signals, to continue progress already made so that the transportation system is more efficient and safer. This reduces the need for expensive capacity expansions. We also did a Plan 2050 background paper on this topic. So I want to take a minute and talk about the Plan 2050 financial element, which is a required element. We coordinated with NIMTIC as they developed their financial element. Our approaches differ a little bit, although our basic assumptions are similar. The Plan 2050 financial element contains 3 potential financial scenarios. The Plan 2050 scenario, the one we believe is most likely, projects that between now and 2050, $120.6 billion will be spent on transportation in our region, averaging $4.2 billion per year. This includes investment in the Gateway program, repair and maintenance, and strategic investments to address the plan's goals and policies. These will fund the hundreds of projects in our project index and implement our Regional Capital Investment Strategy, or RCIS, that prioritizes funding for state of good repair, transit, and travel alternatives, and safety. For example, bridge and roadway preservation is about 32% of the projected spending out to 2050, and transit preservation is about another 32%. The other 2 scenarios, the limited scenario and the aspirational scenario, are as they appear: financial blueprints for allocating resources should significantly less or significantly more resources become available. So now that our plan is completed, it's time to get to work implementing it and building the foundation for the next plan. As we heard from Erich Zimmerman, the federal bipartisan infrastructure law includes a lot of new resources to implement our plan. This could help support and help realize many of our priorities, such as repairing infrastructure and addressing climate change, creating walkable, complete streets, developing sound and equitable policies to realize emerging technologies and electric vehicle adoption, and all the other things that are in our plan. So there's a lot in this act, and my head is still spinning. But I'd like to highlight a few examples that I think are especially exciting and could directly implement Plan 2050 priorities. Regarding resilience, there's an overall thrust in many of the programs to increase resilience and address climate change needs. There was the talk of the new carbon reduction program, which will reduce diesel emissions, port congestion and port congestion, ITS, travel demand management, and bicycle and pedestrian improvements, and the PROTECT, which stands for Promoting Resilient Operations for Transformative, Efficient, and Cost-Saving Transportation, which, as Erich spoke about, will do planning and such for addressing at-risk coastal assets, evaluation routes, etc. There's also grants for charging and fueling infrastructure, and one of the things that I'm particularly excited about is that it includes criteria to address alternative fuel and electric vehicle needs in lower income areas and in areas without private parking. Regarding equity, equity is also infused into many of these programs. And as Erich mentioned, there is the $1 billion Reconnecting Communities grant opportunity to address places divided and decimated by transportation infrastructure, such as Route 280 in East Orange and Newark and Essex counties, and the Cross Bronx Expressway. And I'd like to finally just talk a little bit about the state of good repair, because as I mentioned, about 65% of our program goes towards maintaining and preserving our infrastructure. So for bridges, based on formula funding alone, New Jersey could increase their funding by about 42%. And that's going to be really important for us, not just for our state facilities, but for our county bridges, where approximately 37% of these bridges have been found to be in poor or fair condition. In addition to the new resources, which includes the additional funding for MPOs, we've built strong collaborative relationships within our region and in the greater metropolitan area that are a critical vehicle for plan implementation. We will continue our collaboration with NIMTIC and other partners in the greater region to realize Trans-Hudson rail capacity improvements and the new Port Authority bus terminal, as well as collaborate on equity, climate change, which doesn't stop at borders, and goods movement and other issues. One new potential area of coordination is housing, which Erich mentioned, which will be a required part of future MPL long-range plans. Approximately 10% of the NJTPA region's workforce commutes to New York City. And I recall hearing from New York City Planning at some point that approximately 30% of New York City workers are from New Jersey. I didn't have time to verify that, but I do recall that. So either way, housing and land use is a metropolitan planning issue. In addition, the Together North Jersey Regional Plan strategies and actions are being updated. The TNJ plan was published in 2015 and supported by a HUD grant and a diverse and broad coalition of partners. The new strategies will reflect the priorities of Plan 2050 and the direction of the new federal act, and are a blueprint for cross-jurisdictional regional coordination to address needs related to economy, transportation, environment, resilience, equity, and sustainability. So I want to thank you for giving us the opportunity to present our plan, and I invite you to please visit our website where you can see our plan, the executive summary, and all the appendices. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, Lois. It's really great to hear how these plans, we'll be hearing from Jan, but as you mentioned, the plans are well aligned and there was some coordination between the sister MPOs. And it's also great to hear how these forward-thinking plans will make you well aligned for the future funding opportunities. So thank you so much for that. And we're going to go to Jan Khan, see if we have resolved our technical difficulties.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
We can.
Okay, great. Good morning.
If you could get that, before you do, if you could make that into the presentation.
Yes, I will. I'm just about to do that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah. Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for the opportunity to tell you a little bit about our new plan called Moving Forward. Lois is always a tough act to follow, so I'll do my best on this here. So our new plan, which I said is called Moving Forward, you're seeing the cover on this opening slide, was adopted on September 9th of this year. Before I delve into what what really is moving forward, I just want to, and I believe, remind everyone on this call or on the meeting who we are. So NIMTEC is the Regional Council of Governments, and it's the MPO, Metropolitan Planning Organization for New York City, Long Island, and the Lower Hudson Valley. And on the screen, you can see what its mission is, noting the, excuse me, the bolded text. It's a collaborative forum. We provide sound technical analyses. We focus on planning activities to achieve a shared regional vision. And we always endeavor to capture the maximum amount of federal funds available. This is our planning area, The Lower Hudson Valley, as I mentioned earlier, it's Putnam, Westchester, and Rockland, Nassau, and Suffolk in Long Island, and the 5 New York City boroughs. These are our members. The bottom line, the members shown on the bottom line, that's the Department of Environmental Conservation, NJTPA, FHWA, FDA, US EPA, and Port Authority are all advisory members. Those that above them are the voting members, and they're basically the county executives of Putnam, Rockland, Westchester, Nassau, Suffolk, and in New York City, the commissioners of New York City Planning, DOT, New York City DOT, New York State DOT Commissioner, and the head of the Metropolitan Planning Authority. So now about moving forward. Moving forward is really, it's the long-range plan for the MPO, and it's a federally required product that will enable and guide federal funding for transportation projects throughout the NIMTEC planning area. As many of you would know, because of the area we're in, we need to update this plan every 4 years. Our last plan was adopted in June of 2017, and the plan must have a minimum of 20 years time frame. And basically, as also required, our plan covers all modes of surface transportation in the NIMTEC planning area. It was developed over 2+ years by NIMTEC members with input from our regional stakeholders and members of the public. Basically, the plan is built around the shared vision of the NIMTEC principles and the members. And it recognizes, well, the members do recognize that the critical importance of mobility and people's life, and it aspires to ensure that mobility is provided through our transportation system and reaches everyone in a sustainable, healthy, and equitable manner. There should be investment to efficiently address the transportation needs of those, and the plan should really respond effectively to the transportation challenges of tomorrow. And if and when you have a look at moving forward, you will see we strive to address this shared vision in a number of different ways in the plan. As Lois mentioned, for NJTPA's plan, initially we developed a public participation program that was kind of centered around in-person meetings, but we had to make you had to turn on a dime, so to speak, and head towards virtual outreach, where we did a lot online regional workshops. We had an online engagement platform for those who are interested. We actually used MetroQuest. We did some online focus groups with communities of concern and users of specialized transportation services. We also use online survey called Pullfish, where we surveyed 1,000 respondents. And then ultimately, of course, there is the required formal comment period for the draft plan, and that was also done virtually and done in July of 2021. Our outreach within the short space of time was actually, it was vast, and we tried to cover as much of the region as we could have virtually. Now, moving forward, as all plans is built on certain forecasts, and in our plan, we considered, of course, the socioeconomic and demographic characteristics of the planning area. We looked at travel demand and commodity flows, and we also looked at transformational changes that are likely to impact the transportation system. You know, we looked at, in terms of the transformational changes, we did look at certain drivers of transformational change, which include things like possibly the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. In fact, this was considered in the socioeconomic and demographic forecast. We looked at the possibilities for personal mobility, things like the evolution of shared mobility, e-commerce and distribution innovations, and distributed manufacturing. And then there were, of course, large-scale disruptors, which we looked at, which include climate change and extreme weather, energy transformation, and changing demographic and land use patterns. We then applied all of these forecasts to the shared vision and came up with a number of recommendations in terms of strategies, action, projects, and programs, which we need to pursue to achieve the vision and the goals and objectives of the plan. Bear with me a moment, please. Because I somehow or the other, the PowerPoint misses some of the slides that I'm supposed to have. What I should have talked about is that part of the shared vision for moving forward really encompasses 5 vision goals. And these are safety and security, reliable and easy travel, planning for changing demand, reducing environmental impacts, and resiliency. So, as I mentioned, these forecasts helped us to look at the strategies, actions, projects, and programs to achieve these goals and objectives, and hence the the shared vision for the region. Now, the plan recommendations covering those strategies and actions includes 17 major system enhancements to be undertaken over the period of the plan, which account for roughly $50 billion of expenditure. There are 125 roughly transportation projects and programs for road, bridges, public transit, goods movement, mobility, safety, and non-motorized transportation. There are nearly 400 aspirational or vision projects. There are investment recommendations for human services, and these are contained in the coordinated public transit human services transportation plan that we developed. And then there are strategies and actions for short-term planning activities guided by the shared vision. Now, like with every plan, you have to pay for the strategies and actions that you hope to put into place to, to achieve the vision. Our plan forecasts federal, state, and local funding that can be reasonably expected to accrue to the region over the planning period. And the plan relates that funding to the forecasted costs of preserving and enhancing, our vast and aging transportation network. The costs and forecasts for this plan are shown on this slide. For operations and maintenance, which we are required to show in the plan, there is a cost and funding to meet those costs of $906 billion. And then for capital, there are 2 aspects of it. There is system preservation and system enhancement. As you see on the slide, the forecasted cost for system preservation is $750 billion, and unlike New Jersey's, this is 94% of the costs that we anticipate. And then system enhancement is $50 billion, bringing it to a total of about $800 billion. And our estimated funding envelope to cover the cost of system preservation, system enhancement is $805 billion. And the funding was built on assumptions, many assumptions made, as Lois mentioned, in New Jersey's plan, and built around the federal formula and discretionary funding anticipated, and also state and local funds. The plan also considers, as we can do in a long-range transportation plan, funding that could come from public-private partnerships, value capture, debt financing, discretionary federal funding, and carbon pricing. That's pretty much my presentation, but before I end, I just want to say a quick word on the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and how moving forward sort of relates to that. Basically, moving forward positions NIMTEC to take full advantage of the additional funding that may be coming our way from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. As I mentioned previously, we have about 400 aspirational projects, which at some point can be brought into the constraint plan over time, making use of the additional funds that may be available to us. And these could be the new bridge formula, discretionary programs, the new resiliency, greenhouse gas and mitigation programs, restoration of eligibility for non-engineering highway safety activities, and CMAQ eligibility for things like bike share. So, I think we're in a good position to use plan moving forward to make proper or good use of the additional funds that could be coming our way through the IIJA. And that pretty much is my summary of moving forward the new plan for NIMTEC, which is available at the website that is on this slide, www.nimtec.org/plan moving forward. I apologize for the few missing slides on the goals and the goals for the plan. And I want to thank you for the opportunity to present a brief description of our plan. And thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Jan. And as mentioned, this plan does poise us for addressing the new funding that may be coming our way. And also, I'd like to point out that both of the plans had robust public outreach, and it really seems that we've learned a lot of how to use more types of public outreach tools and frankly, reach more people and people who maybe in the past have not participated. So I think we've learned a lot through this process. We were sort of forced into some of it due to the pandemic, but I think that that's a bright side of that process. We are going to move into our public participation session now. Again, thank you to both Lois and Jan for those overviews. And if folks have follow-up questions, feel free to reach out to them directly after this meeting. So I'm going to hand it over to Gerry. Gerry?
Yes. Thank you to our presenters on those plans. We are going to move into now the public participation section. We've set aside 15 minutes of our meeting for this public participation. The time is reserved for registered participants on a first-come, first-served basis who registered by 9:30 a.m. this morning. And we ask that the remarks be limited to no more than 3 minutes if possible, so that we can hear from both speakers comfortably in this period of time. So Andrea, if you can just call out the two registered speakers, please.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you. Andrea?
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you, Andrea.
Okay. The first presenter will be Neil Weissman, and the second presenter will be Robert D. Domenico from Cargo Fish. So can you please unmute Neil Weissman first?
Good afternoon. Can I be heard now?
Yes, you can.
You're good, Neil.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Neil Weissman of Complete George, and a link to extended remarks has been posted in the chat. So I'd ask you to bring that up while I'm talking. But as part of a $2 billion renovation, the Port Authority will soon open the north path across the George Washington Bridge. Walkers, runners, and cyclists will flock to see it. By spring, their numbers will explode, but that's when its failure as public infrastructure will become clear. To place the plan in context, it's important to acknowledge the surge in active transportation over the last decade, paced by far-sighted infrastructure that supports safe use, induces demand, and insulates their operators from liability. The Port Authority gave us the raised Bayonne Bridge, a 12-foot bikeway. The new Goethals, a 10-foot path. Both projects now facilitate 1-hour commutes from New Jersey into Lower Manhattan. Cyclists and pedestrians cross the Como Bridge on a 12-foot path and can spread out across the 20-foot Kosciuszko. This spring, New York State Legislature passed bills calling on the MTA to extend bike access across its 7 bridges. In September, New York City converted a car lane across the Brooklyn Bridge to alleviate perennial conflicts with tourists, and it committed to double capacity on the Queensboro. So in this context, that the Port Authority has rebranded the North Path across the George as the North Walk. This is not unexpected, given the liability the agency would incur for permitting high volumes of cyclists and pedestrians to interact on a substandard facility. Nevertheless, the PA's decision will have a long-term impact on the region. 2 examples. First, presume New York moves forward with some form of congestion pricing. If so, expect the city to restrict non-resident parking in Upper Manhattan. In this scenario, a widened George could support a park, bike, and ride option for tens of thousands of North Jersey commuters. Second, micromobility presents a unique opportunity for urban transport. The devices are cheap, effective, sustainable, and extremely popular. They reduce congestion, don't need charging stations, and their net emissions are a fraction of full-sized electric vehicles. But because these devices stress the level of service on even modern bikeways, their sustained adoption will depend on a continued build-out of infrastructure that enables safe operation, which is why the PA's choice not to expand access across the George while they have the patient on the table is such a lost opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil. Our next speaker is Robert D. Domenico from Cargo Fish. I do not see him listed, but he may be on the telephone line. So I don't know if he could speak actually from the phone. And we'll move on. I just had another alert that Mary Bowden would like to speak as well. So at the time, can you please unmute Mary Bowden? And I will still continue to look for Robert on the list. Fidel?
Give me a minute, Dre. I'm still looking for Maury. I don't see Maury Bowden.
He's there.
He's on the list, Fidel. Scroll down just under Mukta.
Hello, Maury. I just sent you a request to mute your line. Could you please accept the request?
Okay. You have to read the newspapers. The overriding issue today is global warming. Every automobile manufacturer is as quickly shifting to electric cars as they can. They know something. Everything else fails under global warming. The aquifers in the Midwest have been pumped to a level that's unsustainable. California cities are in drought. The California Water Commission has no water to distribute other than for drinking water. We're building bus garages. Why do we have to put buses in a garage that have to be heated? We'll have to learn how to keep them outside. The one thing that really wasn't discussed is how short the time frame is. 2050 is beyond catastrophe. We've got years, not decades. When you put down 2050, we won't be here. I speak about this not for myself because I'm 88 and I'll be dead pretty soon. And what I put on all my emails now is trust nothing I write or say. There's no reason for you to have any faith in what I say. But check it out yourself. Go out there and watch at railroad crossings where they have both traffic lights and red lights at the same crossing. Why? Because 100, 200 years ago, there were no traffic lights, and so they used flashing red lights, but we can't stop it. At the 3rd Avenue Bridge and various bridges in New York, you got traffic lights and gates. Kind of works. We have at every railroad station a public address system, so why are we blowing the train horn and disturbing the people that live near it? Because we can't stop. We've got people that are so distracted when the light turns green, somebody has to honk the horn. And then when they look out, they need to know that the yellow line is on the driver's left and right. But that break in the road's been white on both sides forever. In fact, if you read the book, it was there before yellow lines were invented. Can't correct it. There was a dotted line to indicate a drop lane or an auxiliary lane. The book's been wrong for 30 years. They can't fix it because somebody made a mistake in the diagram. All it did was close the open gap with a dotted line. It is your responsibility to deal with this, not mine. And I can't do it. I'm too old. My grandchildren's generation depends on you making it easier for people to cope with the changing world. If you look out the window of a bus to the car next to you, you see the people texting while they're at the traffic light. I've heard that. Use your eyes and look for yourself. Naomi, you've heard me say this before, and so does everybody else. Your responsibility. I can't do it anymore. I'll be dead pretty soon. So it's been a pleasure to work with so many good people. I could not have done this without being taught by John Platt and a bunch of other people. I thank all of you for helping me to learn, to be able to get to this point, to be able to encourage you to look for yourself and do not accept what was valid 2 years ago, 5 years ago. Thank you all.
Thank you, Mary. Gerry, that will be all for public participation.
Okay, thank you, Andrea. Thanks to our speakers for the information. Just for Neil Weissman, we do have the link in the chat pod. I understand you put that up there, so we will get the fuller comments out to the Map Forum members. So now we're going to move into the last part of our agenda on our work program updates. I'm going to turn this back over to Deb Nelson. Deb?
Great, thank you. We're going to have a few report outs on some various Map Forum working groups and initiatives. I'm going to start with a report out on the data collaboration workshop that we've been facilitating here at NIMTIC. You know, as we're aware, with this, in the multi-state map form region, we have a lot of disparate data collection and management efforts, and that we use to address our regional planning issues. But it seemed like we are missing an opportunity to share that knowledge and the resources to better collaborate on how we approach, you know, we're getting increasing data needs and its options, and it seemed like a great opportunity for us to look across the region for an opportunity to collaborate. So we partnered with the Federal Highway Administration Resource Center to develop and host a data collaboration workshop for the map forum members. You know, the reason we were going through the map forum is, you know, it was our thought that as a starting point, the forum and its topic-specific working groups, namely resiliency, mobility, and freight, would be able to help to identify commonalities and needs. So we've held 2 sessions so far, and the 3rd and final session will be is scheduled for Monday, December 6th. Before we got started, the FHWA conducted a pre-survey in order to kind of get a feeling from the participants of what are the significant needs, you know, what are their plans, desires, aspirations related to data and in the context of data and regional planning. So that, you know, helped to give some context. And the first session was actually held on September 22nd. And that session helped to set the stage. There were presentations and discussions regarding various data collaboration efforts. Some of those presentations included NIMTIC's planned survey community of practice that we'll be launching soon, 2 data sharing platforms that we have in our region, the Map Forum Hub, and NIMTIC's Transportation Information Gateway, or the TIG. We also had the opportunity to have a presentation from one of our peers. This is one of the benefits of using Federal Highway Administration's Resource Center. They know who's doing what out there in the nation, and they connected us and arranged for a presentation on the Portland State University data portal from Portland, Oregon. And that was really very helpful and helped to guide and some of our thoughts related to the data portals. We explored and discussed barriers to coordination, such as different priorities and the need for additional effort to standardize data. It's not as easy as just, hey, let's share data. There's a lot behind that. One of them being, you know, we do have different priorities. It's tough enough to do it within your own MPO and your member agencies, and then to try to do it on a bigger region is even more challenging. And also, you know, we need to make sure that the data is valid and standardized, so there's a lot to that. And we also discussed benefits of data collaboration, such as realizing economies of scale and consistencies of approach. The second session was held a week later when these ideas were still fresh. We focused on strategies and effective practices for data collection and partnering. Again, another excellent opportunity to hear from another peer. This time it was from the Wasatch Front Regional Council in Utah, and on their data collaboration efforts that Utah is doing. And it's interesting because they talked about data procurement and a collaboration structure. They have interagency modeling committees, a joint projects committee, and a forum in which they can contract for projects of mutual interest. And this is a statewide thing, so there were really some great things that came out of that. And we also learned more about NYSDOT, New York State DOT's NPMRDS analysis tools. And then using that information, we held 2 breakout sessions, one to discuss data needs and application, and the other to talk about data governance and partnerships. So the final session, as I mentioned, will be on Monday. We're going to prioritize strategies. We're looking at near, mid, and long-term strategies, and we're looking to enhance our coordination. Just some of our early thoughts from what we've learned already are opportunities to potentially align freight data procurements across the MAP region. Also, looking at governance standards to support data sharing and collaboration, potentially helping to leverage some of the resources on the Map Forum Hub site and other tools that we have. We're also going to look at opportunities to maybe establish and define data governance and organizational needs around some of our key initiatives, such as, you know, some of our freight needs, our household travel survey development. And then, you know, possibly looking at some of this data coordination being structured under like that community of practice approach where we bring together and share our knowledge and our resources. And it really goes beyond just the data itself. We're looking at options to explore case studies, pooled funding opportunities, sharing requests for proposals, those sort of things that will help to support our regional collaboration going forward. So I want to, you know, thank everyone who's contributed their time, their thoughts, their energy, their input to these workshop sessions. And if you haven't attended, but you are now intrigued, you can still join us for the third one, because that's the one where we're going to be really looking at what our next steps are. And so we look forward to seeing where this brings us. And, you know, hopefully this will help us to coordinate and collaborate better on our data collection and management, both across the larger region of the MAP Forum, but also within our own MPOs and regional councils of government. So thank you for that. And I think what I'm going to do for the sake of time is we're going to just continue with some of these report outs, and then I could take questions if we have time. So with that, our next report out will be from Ann Strauss-Weeder, who is going to talk about the multi-state freight working group. And Ann, take it away.
Okay, give me one moment here. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Oh, excellent. And let me go into full mode here. Thanks very much, everyone. Well, here's the good news. I don't have to explain supply chain to anyone anymore. It's in the news. In fact, it's on the cover of Monday's New Yorker. So obviously we have a lot to talk about. And let me start by just giving everyone here a very brief update on what's happening in our larger MAP Forum region. First, the Port of New York and New Jersey. Now, the situation at the port is very different than what you've been hearing on the news. First of all, I checked just before this meeting, there are 3 vessels at anchor. The reason that there are vessels at anchor are A, they're waiting for the tide, if they're a very large vessel, to come in. They may be an unscheduled visit, a charter, or they may be running way behind schedule. But there are 3 right now. The average wait when that happens is a day. So basically the port essentially has no backup on vessels like you've seen on the West Coast or to the south of us. What you see on this screen is the latest statistics from the Port Authority. October was the record high in the number of 20-foot equivalent container units handled, almost 800,000. And you can see how we're running higher than we were in 2020, which is the blue line. But you can also see all the irregularities as the supply chain really tries to ramp up because of what's been happening over the course of the global pandemic. Something I think we all know, that e-commerce has remained strong. Now, to be clear, many individuals think of e-commerce as all those packages we receive. E-commerce has really morphed into direct delivery to consumer, and now includes such items as gym equipment, furniture, or food. It also isn't direct consumer to the house necessarily. It can include buy online, pick up in store, which I suspect a lot of us have done during the pandemic. And obviously, looking at the chart here, and this is through October of this year, is something we're continuing to do in groceries in particular. We have all discovered that it's much easier to place the order online at no additional cost and pick it up on the store and run with it home. So in fact, I'll be picking up an order from Whole Foods after work today. And indeed, it's a really interesting example in grocery sales because supermarkets were never set up for something like this. So in the space of less than a year, industry has really come up with these micro distribution pods that go into the store with a lot of robotic equipment that can even pick up very delicate produce and bag it, because that's one of the ways they deal with it. Otherwise, buy online, pick up in store for grocery stores was losing them a great deal of money. So here's some background on a even faster evolving supply chain, not only in our area, not only nationally, but globally. In terms of what we've been doing in the Multi-State Freight Working Group, I want to thank everyone who's here, who may have attended or spoke at our September 14th Industrial Real Estate workshop, where we really heard about the trends. We heard about the different types of operation, including the different size of buildings, truck traffic generation, worker levels. We heard from a couple of the MPOs, both in the MAP forum and outside of it, about the tools and guidance available. And for anyone who could not make that, here's a link on the screen, and we'll post it in chat, in terms of where you can see the presentations, the video, and read the summary that was prepared by Mark Soloff. In addition, I'll do a shameless plug for NJTPA on December 13th at 1 o'clock, and I'll post this link in the chat as well. We have our December Freight Initiatives Committee meeting, which is our annual industrial real estate update. And we have 4 speakers on that subject, giving a up-to-the-minute update on what's happening on industrial real estate. They'll be talking about a brand new public-private partnership between Prologis and the city of Newark called Hire Newark, which has aspirational goals of training at least 1,000 workers from a 3-county area using a virtual platform, and placing at least 600 of those individuals in transportation, logistics, distribution, and production jobs in our entire region. So very exciting there. We'll also be hearing about cold storage, which has been an area where we've had great need from one of the leading experts on that subject. So if you can, please join us on the 13th. In terms of the MAP Forum, and we're in December, so now it's time to look at 2022. We'll be continuing our truck parking initiatives. We'll be providing an update on what's been happening with the work on emergency truck parking facilities. A 4th truck parking concern has been brought to our attention by the drivers in our region. And I throw this to the broader community because it's something we're going to have to figure out some solutions for. And this is for the drivers themselves, especially the owner-operators. When they go home at the end of the day, local zoning does not permit them to park their power rig in their driveway. They must park it somewhere else. And there's insufficient parking in our region and the broader area for them to do so securely and cost effectively. I've looked at some of the locations they've described. They're charging anywhere from $900 to $3,000 a month. It's just not feasible for some of them. So we do have a 4th area for where do the drivers park their vehicles when not in use and leave their cars securely. And all this is improving the driver experience, which is part of attracting and retaining drivers in this critical area. Gerry and I will be telling you a lot more about a planned clean freight workshop, talking about some of the practices, as well as presenting the NIMTIC study on clean freight corridors. Right now, that is scheduled for March 24th for 10 a.m. to 12 noon on the GoToMeeting virtual platform. A lot of details to follow. And already start planning for the fall of next year. One of the big issues in supply chain is not having sufficient workers for the multiple industrial properties in our entire multi-state area. It's one thing to train and secure the workers, but if those workers cannot get from where they live to where they work consistently and not necessarily have to rely on a private car or a van supplied by an employment agency, they're not going to take the job, or you're going to be looking for new people. So we're going to be focusing on that last mile commutation option for both workers at production facilities and freight operations. And we hope this will be a peer exchange, not only from the members of the MAP Forum, but we also hope to pull from organizations around the country who have looked at that last mile connectivity. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and allow us to get on to our next speaker.
Great, thank you, Anne. And we have a lot of things to look forward to. The next working group that we would like a report out from will be Megan Sloan from Connecticut Metropolitan Council of Government and Jennifer Fogliano from the North Jersey Transportation Planning Authority. And they're both talking about the Multi-State Resiliency Working Group.
Inky, can you bring up the PowerPoint for 5B, 5C rather?
Gerry, can you unmute Megan, please?
We can hear you now.
Hi, this is Jennifer. I'm not sure if Megan's unmuted.
Okay, Fidel, we need to unmute Megan Sloan, please.
I just unmuted myself, thank you. So Jennifer has the slides up. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for those who are serving on the Resilience Working Group. I always like to start these updates just by referring to our MOU and the focus, and we really try to guide the group's discussions and topics by referring to the MOU, and that's cooperation and informal communication and document exchange. Can you go to the next slide? So in September, we had our summer 2021 meeting. There was a focus on transportation resilience, equity, and public health. I'm going to cover the New Jersey aspect of it. Can you go to the next slide? We had John Carnegie with the Voorhees Transportation Center at Rutgers present on planning for a healthy, just, resilient, and CO2 neutral mobility. This project is really focused on achieving New Jersey's 2050 goal of reducing their CO2 emissions by 80%. But there was also a significant focus on an equitable and just transportation system. Next slide, please. Based on some of the guiding concepts of creating networks of diverse and inclusive neighborhoods, thinking of mobility as a service, and really the idea of social justice and creating city grids that allow people to meet their needs by walking or bicycling within a 15-minute radius. Can you go to the next slide, please? So he brought up this concept, the 15-minute city or neighborhood. And really there were like 3 overarching aspects of measuring this. Looking at the demographics, access to education, poverty, health behaviors and outcome, the type of place. Specifically, I highlighted climate vulnerability because we're resilience focused, but I think other areas that contribute to resilience, such as access to employment and access to well-paying employment, medical and essential services, and then education. And then, of course, looking at the role of transportation in there, density, intersection density, the road network, transit, alternative fueling stations. I think that's going to become more important as people switch their type of car they drive. And a process for measuring these factors to understand accessibility. Next slide, please. So this was really the products that he shared with us. This is looking at Middlesex County and just mapping how accessible these these needs to meet basic needs are in neighborhoods and in counties. Next slide, please. So, and then overall, combining all of those different characteristics to, measure accessibility. Best access is in yellow, moderate access is, in purple, and then limited access is significant. Then also looking at low income block groups. So you'll see towards the bottom of the slide, there's some, impacted communities where access is very limited, but then, farther up, there's better access to, to various services. And next slide. Okay, and I'll hand this over to Jennifer, and she will start presenting.
Great, thanks, Megan. I am not on mute. Okay. So at the last Resiliency Working Group meeting, we also heard from Gerry Bogacz of NIMTIC, who presented on the inclusion of public health, as was mentioned earlier in their NIMTIC's presentation. They included public health in the transportation resiliency section of NIMTIC's recently adopted regional transportation plan. The plan moving forward is built around a shared vision for regional mobility endorsed by the MTO's member agencies. And one of those 5 vision goals centers around resiliency. That is a transportation system that is resilient and can mitigate, adapt to, and respond to chronic and acute stresses and disruptions. This goal seeks to enhance the system's resilience to stressors and disruptions that will have a growing impact across the region in the longer term. These stressors include climate change, sea level rise, and extreme weather, human-caused stressors such as cyber attacks and acts of terrorism, and public health emergencies. And public health was not in the early drafts of the RTP, but the pandemic demonstrated, as NJTPA did this as well, it demonstrated how a number of issues, for example, the pace of economic recovery, changes in business and employment, variants of the virus, vaccinations, and public perception challenge the resiliency of the transportation system. And so it was important to include it in the long-range plan. Next slide, please. So due to the public health emergency provoked by COVID-19, we've experienced organizational impacts on transportation agencies and service providers, such as absenteeism in the transportation workforce because of workers' illnesses or injury. We've experienced operational vulnerabilities for agencies and providers, including protection of those workers, supply chain vulnerabilities, as we've heard from Ann Strauss-Weider, such as food distribution challenges, surface transportation vulnerabilities, such as the need to alter transit services to reduce the risk of contagion during the pandemic, and impacts to maritime shipping, which plays a fundamental role in supporting essential commodities such as food and energy. Next slide, please. And here are some highlights from the plan for recommended planning and research to increase resiliency. Inventory and benchmark resiliency and adaptation practices for all sectors. support the development of detailed transportation contingency plans, coordinate transit agencies and jurisdictions in developing procedures and plans to respond to emergency events. And here we see that NMTIC has included mention of the map forum to explore improved travel options and redundancies through the map forum's resilience working group. And you can refer to their plan for additional resiliency.
Sorry, Sam, that was me.
Recommended strategies and actions.
That was also me.
Including those for data collection, forecasting, and performance assessment. And before moving on, I'd just like to mention that the full New Jersey and New York presentations, which Megan and I had mentioned today, can be found on the Map Hub site. Next slide, please. This is our last slide. I know we're running short on time. Second to last slide. Just to let you know, there will be a meeting of the Resilience Working Group coming up December 15th. And next slide. The last one. Quick mention of what we will be focusing on. So at this upcoming meeting, the Resilience Working Group will hear from Dr. Joanna Wozniak-Brown of Resilient CT at the University of Connecticut. Under a 2-year grant, Resilient CT has looked at climate vulnerabilities, long-range plans, and other factors to understand how they relate to transit-oriented developments in Connecticut, and they developed zones of shared risk, where there are multiple issues, such as roads that have been blocked, not allowing for emergency management to get through, as an example. Using this analysis, they identified resilience opportunity areas and are developing design strategies to increase resiliency. Dr. Wozniak-Brown will also tell the working group about their under development environmental justice mapping tool, which differs from EPA's EJ screen in certain ways, including that it has a climate focus. And following her presentation, we would like the working group to begin a conversation around the individual and shared barriers and challenges to resilience that we face in the MAP forum. And Megan and I will administer a survey to the members to identify our shared priorities for resiliency. And I think we can leave it at that for now. And we'll take any questions if there's time for questions.
I'm sorry, I think we do not have time for questions, which is really unfortunate because I think for all of these report outs there might have been, but I do think we need to move on to, we have 2 other very brief report outs on some multi-state studies that are being done related to freight. But thank you so much, Megan and Jennifer, for that insightful presentation. And I do encourage folks to attend that multi-state resiliency working group. And as Anne pointed out, with the coming events, you have the opportunity to participate on the freight working group events as well. So we're going to start with a Clean Freight Corridors Planning Study update from Leslie Forger from NMTIC, and then that will be followed by Yev Galinsky of NMTIC will update us on the Regional Freight Land Use Study. Leslie?
Thanks, Debra. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Excellent. So I'm just going to give a brief update concerning the Clean Freight Corridors Planning Study. First, what is the study? The Clean Freight Corridors Study will identify a series of roadways that can be designated through federal designation programs and or through the NMTIC Regional Transportation Plan, or RTP, as clean freight corridors to advance high efficiency, low emission, alternative transportation technologies for goods movement across all types of freight-related vehicles. So essentially, we're just trying to pick out the optimal corridors within our region that we will recommend those, corridors as the best corridors for clean freight technology, support clean freight technology. The study right now, we're currently in the home stretch. Drafts of our final deliverables are scheduled to be completed by early January. They will be reviewed internally by both NMTIC staff and our appropriate reviewing committees. And the study is slated for completion by April 2022. So that's all I have concerning the Clean Freight Corridor study effort. Next up is Yev, and he will speak to the Regional Freight Land Use Study. Yev?
Thank you, Leslie. Good morning. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can.
So the original land use study is looking at how land is being used for industrial and freight uses in the map area region, and the potential trend that relate to such land use. So there's several tasks that are included in the study. First, the study will collect and map land use in a map area form. And the next step is to perform market analysis of the industrial real estate within the study area. After that, we will develop land use topologies based on the data, and we will analyze the trends that pertain to the industrial land uses. So at this point, we're very close to completing both the data collection for the mapping effort and the data collection for the market analysis. We're starting to do some of the topology development and some of the trend analysis based on the data that we've collected. At this point, we're expecting the study to complete during the summer of 2020. That's all I got.
Great, thank you, Yev. Well, it's really no surprise that freight and resiliency and these various freight studies are things of interest of the multi-state map forum. And there's a lot of really great work going on here. And I think there's an opportunity for people to continue to learn and collaborate on these efforts. So I hope folks will join us for some of those working group meetings and other events that have been mentioned. I do apologize that we do not have time for any questions, but you do have people's names and contacts if you want to follow up. With that, I'm going to hand the baton back over to Gerry for some closing remarks and to adjourn the meeting.
Thank you, Deb. I realize that I'm the only thing standing in front between all of you and lunch. So very, very quickly, the next activity of the map forum, apart from the various working group activities that you've heard, will be our spring meeting, which we traditionally hold in the May-June timeframe. Normally that is a meeting that is focused on Connecticut issues, and we may continue that. We don't know whether it will be virtual or some type of hybrid arrangement. All those decisions will be made later, but we'll be getting information out about that down the road. I do want to thank all the map forum partners for, you can tell from this very substantive meeting we just completed that there are some real issues being dealt with by our partnership over the broad multi-state region, and it's important to continue to work in that at that scale, as well as the individual work that we all do as MPOs and COGs within our own planning areas. So we very much appreciate your willingness to continue the partnership and your participation today. And for the audience, thank you for hearing this information over the past 2 hours. We are finishing on time, even though we did lose a little time. But we all thought it was important to hear what Erich Zimmerman had to say about this monumental legislation that we're all beginning to deal with. And although we've been through extraordinary challenges over the last 2 years, and we'll continue to face those challenges probably through at least the next year, we also have extraordinary opportunities in front of us. So it's going to be a very exciting time to do what we all do. So with that, thank you all very much for your time today. Please enjoy your lunches. Have a safe holiday season and Happy New Year. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Gerry. Thanks, everyone. Bye now.
Thank you.
Bye now.